Before I tell you what my daughter did, you need to understand something. The deepest betrayals in this world don't arrive shouting. They arrive in a sensible blouse, holding a folder of papers, calling you dad in a voice softer than it has any right to be. They smile while they cut. So ask yourself, honestly, what would you have done if it had been your own child standing across the table? And if a story like this stirs something in you, about family, about the lines blood is supposed to honor, please give the video a like and subscribe to Hollow Tales. Tell me in the comments which town you're listening from. I always like to know where these stories travel. My name is Desmond Hartley. I'm 63 years old. And until that Tuesday morning in late autumn, I genuinely believed there were certain things a daughter would never do to her own father. I had raised Caitlin through tantrums in the supermarket aisles of Palmerston North, through the sulking teenage years when she barely spoke to me, through her wedding to a man I quietly never trusted, and through the loud, certain selfishness she carried into her 30s and called ambition. She had disappointed me before. Of course she had, but I always believed there was a floor beneath her, a moral one. Because somewhere underneath the woman she had become, she was still the little girl my wife and I had taught to ride a bike on the footpath outside our first house in Leven. That Tuesday morning in my dining room, I learned I had been wrong about the floor. My daughter stood across from me with a manila folder pressed against her chest, the way solicitors hold them in television dramas. Her blazer was too sharp for a family visit. Her hair was pinned back the way she wore it when she wanted to be taken seriously at her real estate office. Her husband Trevor stood beside her, hands in his pockets, smiling like a man who had already mentally renovated the place. My granddaughter wasn't with them. They had left her with Trevor's mother. That, more than anything, told me what kind of morning this was meant to be. Caitlin tapped the folder against her palm. "It's done, Dad." The words landed in the room like a stone in a still pond. I said nothing. The only sound was my late wife's mantel clock above the sideboard. Eileen had bought it at a market in Greytown 30 years ago. After she passed 2 winters back, that clock became the way I measured the hours when sleep wouldn't come. That morning, it sounded like something counting me down. Trevor cleared his throat. "You signed everything last night, mate. Remember? Mate." He'd never called me Dad. I noticed. "All sorted now," Caitlin added, her voice arranged into the careful brightness she used on first home buyers. "The house, your shares in the workshop, the term deposits. We'll manage it all properly from here." Properly. There was that word again. The word people use when they mean they're taking something from you. For 31 years I had run Hartley Joinery out of a unit on the industrial estate in Lower Hutt. I'd started it with a borrowed table saw and a second-hand ute. By the time my daughter was telling me my life needed managing, that workshop fed 9 families. The house she was now talking about was the one Eileen had picked out from a worn-up listing in the Hutt News in 1991. I had laid the Cowrie floorboards in the front room myself. I had painted Caitlin's nursery the wrong shade of yellow and had to do it again. I had planted the cowhigh in the front garden the day she started primary school. And now she was standing in the dining room of that house, telling me my life was a thing to be administered. I didn't shout. That confused them. Trevor had clearly expected anger. He wanted it. An old joiner shouting in his dining room would have been useful, the kind of thing a solicitor could later describe as erratic. So I stayed quiet. I held out my hand. Caitlin gave me the folder with the practiced satisfaction of someone closing a sale. "There's no point digging through it now, Dad. You already signed it all on Sunday." Sunday. Yes. Sunday I had been at her house for what she had called a quiet Father's Day catch-up. There had been a glass of red wine, a roast lamb that wasn't quite cooked through, and at some point her solicitor had arrived from down the road, all friendliness and apologies for working on a weekend. I had signed quite a lot of paper that afternoon. I remembered enough to be ashamed. I turned the pages slowly. Caitlin's smile widened as I worked through them. When I reached the last page, I paused, and I looked up at my daughter, because the night before, I had replaced it. Her smile twitched just once. Small enough that another father might have missed it. But fathers study their children long before children learn to hide. That little flicker at the corner of her mouth, I had been watching it since she was 4 years old, lying about the broken vase in the hallway. It was the same face, older now, more practiced, but the same. "Something the matter?" she asked. For a moment, the woman across the table blurred, and I saw the child she had once been, barefoot on the back lawn, running into my arms because the cicadas were too loud. That child was gone. In her place stood a woman who believed she had quietly hollowed out her father's life and walked away with the contents. The saddest part was that I understood how she had got here. Caitlin had always been frightened of being ordinary. She hated slow things. She hated the way her mother and I had built our life one careful year at a time, and she called it small. She married a man who understood her hunger and fed it. And somewhere along the line, the hunger ate them both. Trevor came from a family that measured affection in postcodes and four-wheel drives. The first time Caitlin brought him home for Sunday tea in Lower Hutt, he hadn't looked at our house like a guest. He had looked at it like a man weighing it up. After Eileen died, my daughter changed. Or perhaps the parts of her I had refused to see simply got louder. She started referring to the workshop as the family asset. She asked careful, casual questions about my will, my Kiwi saver, my term deposits. She made gentle observations about my age, my forgetfulness, the stress of running the business alone. "You shouldn't have to carry all of this on your own, Dad. You need someone younger watching the books. Trevor's got a great accountant." At first, I thought she was worried about me. A father wants to believe that. Then one Sunday evening, I went to her place for tea, and I came back to my coat in the hallway to find her in the kitchen with Trevor. They didn't know I was on the other side of the wall. Trevor was saying, "If he changes the trust before we have him sign the new one, we're stuffed." And Caitlin, my little girl, said, "He won't. He still trusts me." Then she gave a soft laugh that didn't belong to anyone I recognized. "He always has." That was the night I stopped being only a father and became a witness. Betrayal from a stranger is a clean cut. Betrayal from family is a slow leak under the floorboards. You explain away the damp patch on the ceiling for years, telling yourself it's nothing, until the whole thing comes down on you in the night. Caitlin had begun small. She offered to help with the bills after Eileen passed. I let her. Grief does odd things to a man. I could still walk into the workshop and run a job through to completion, but I couldn't open an envelope from the insurance company because Eileen's name was on it. So when my daughter said, "You've carried enough, Dad. Let me carry some," I let her in. Too far in. Trevor began turning up to meetings with my accountant. Caitlin said he had a head for the legal side. They both started using the word estate in casual conversation, the way other people might say weather. Then came the small papers, a medical directive, just in case, a financial enduring power of attorney, only for emergencies, a revised partnership agreement at the workshop, just routine housekeeping. Each time I asked too many questions, Caitlin looked wounded. "Dad," she said once, with that particular tremor in her voice she had perfected as a teenager. "Do you actually think I'd do something to hurt you?" That was always her favorite tool. Guilt. And I hated that it still worked. Even after the kitchen. Even after the laugh. A foolish part of me kept trying to make it smaller. Maybe Trevor was the one pushing. Maybe she misunderstood her own situation. Maybe I had heard that laugh wrong. That is the cruelest part of being betrayed by your own child. Your heart keeps trying to make the wound shallower than it is. But hope, when it makes you blind, is a dangerous thing in an old man's hands. So I started watching. I photographed signature pages with my phone before handing anything back. I wrote dates in pencil on the inside of envelopes. I kept a small black notebook in the top drawer of the workshop tea room, hidden under a manual for a router I no longer owned. Then I rang Hamish Pritchard. Hamish had been my accountant for 19 years. He was dry, methodical, and entirely allergic to anything resembling drama. When he sat down at his desk in Petone and worked through the documents I'd brought him, he went very still. Finally, he took off his glasses. "Desmond," he said, "did you sign all of these?" "Some," I said. "I'm honestly not sure which ones anymore." That was the first time my own voice frightened me. Hamish folded his glasses and set them down. "Don't sign anything else without ringing me. Not a birthday card. Nothing." Then he sent me to Marguerite Donnelly, a solicitor in Wellington with a reputation for not enjoying nonsense. She read everything in silence at her desk on Featherston Street, the harbor gray behind her window. When she finished, she didn't speak for a full minute. "Mr. Hartley," she said eventually, "these papers aren't accidental. They've been built." Then she found the clause. It was buried in the middle of an instrument Caitlin had described to me as a temporary management arrangement. Marguerite translated it cleanly. "If this is executed together with the final page they've prepared for you, your daughter and her husband will hold controlling authority over your shares in the joinery and the right to initiate sale of your home under the wording of asset protection." I stared at her desk for a long time. My house. Yes. My workshop. Yes. Everything you and your wife built has been reduced to clauses, Mr. Hartley. Waiting on a signature. She asked who had drafted the final page. "The solicitor down the road from Caitlin's office, a man called Dean Weberly." She asked who currently held the signed copy. "They did. But," she said, "the formal packet was technically still in motion until delivery and acknowledgement on Tuesday morning. If they're careless," she said, "or arrogant, or both, there may still be a way." That was when she explained the replacement page. The original final page granted my daughter and her husband control. Marguerite drafted a page that looked nearly identical. The same letterhead, the same paragraph layout, the same signature block, but legally it did the precise opposite. It revoked all prior authorizations. It confirmed my sole authority over my home, my business, and my accounts. It triggered an automatic audit of any attempted transfers involving Caitlin or Trevor. "This is legal?" I asked. "If you sign it knowingly, and it reflects your true intent, yes. The question is whether they'll bother to read it." For weeks they had been mistaken about me. They had mistaken grief for weakness. They had mistaken love for stupidity. Now their entire plan rested on whether they could be bothered to look at the page they were about to take from me. The night before that Tuesday, Caitlin and Trevor came to my house in Lower Hutt with their solicitor. Dean Weberly was a polished man in his early 40s, with the particular emptiness of someone who had learned to build cages out of language. I stood at the dining table with my hand on the back of Eileen's chair, slowing my breathing the way I used to slow it before turning a difficult piece on the lathe. The replacement page was hidden in the drawer of the sideboard, beneath a stack of birthday cards Eileen had kept from the children at her old kindergarten. A foolish part of me was still hoping Caitlin would arrive alone. That she would sit down and say, "Dad, I can't do this." But she walked through my front door with Trevor on one shoulder and Dean on the other, and she didn't even wipe her shoes on the mat. Caitlin set the folder on the dining table. "Just the final confirmation, Dad. Then we can move forward." Move forward. Another phrase people use when they want you to stop looking at what they've done. "You're in a hurry," I said. She sighed. Exactly the way her mother used to sigh at me. And it cut. "Dad, we've been over this." "No," I said. "You've talked. I've listened." Her jaw tightened. She needed me confused. A questioning father complicated her story. Trevor put a hand on her shoulder and arranged his face into something patient. Dean slid the papers across the dining table. Just standard forms, Mr. Hartley. Your daughter will assume limited management responsibility. You remain respected, of course. Respected. Not safe. Not in charge. Respected. Like a portrait on a wall. I picked up my pen. Caitlin's shoulders dropped half an inch too soon. That was her mistake. She thought my quietness meant I had given in. She had forgotten that grief teaches a man how to sit still inside pain. I signed where Marguerite had told me to sign. I moved slowly. I asked deliberately dull questions. I made my hand tremble on a couple of the pages. It made me feel ill, performing weakness for my own daughter. But Caitlin and Trevor fed on weakness, so I gave them the appearance of it. Then we came to the final page. Dean turned the stack and tapped the signature line with the cap of his pen. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. I need a glass of water, Trevor exhaled. A glass of water, Trevor, I said again, and stood up. In the kitchen, my hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was grief. My own daughter had become something I needed to protect myself from inside the house her mother had decorated. I slid the replacement page from the sideboard drawer beneath a folded tea towel. I filled a glass at the sink. I came back into the dining room. Caitlin was checking her phone. Trevor was murmuring something to Dean. None of them looked up at me. That was how thoroughly they had stopped seeing me. They had made me invisible at the very moment they should have been watching most carefully. I sat down. I coughed once. I knocked the pen off the edge of the table with my elbow. It rolled towards Trevor's foot. He bent for it. Caitlin turned to watch him. Dean glanced down. And in that small handful of seconds, I slid the prepared final page off the top of the stack and replaced it with the one from beneath the tea towel. Trevor handed me the pen. There you go, mate. I signed. Dean witnessed. Caitlin gathered the documents back into the folder with the brisk satisfaction of a woman locking a door. None of them read the final page. They were too busy winning. Before they left, my daughter hugged me. That was the worst part. Not the documents, not Trevor's smug little pat on my shoulder. The hug. Her arms went around me the way they had when she was 9 years old, and frightened of a thunderstorm in the Manawatu. For one terrible second, my body remembered loving her before my mind remembered what she had just done. You'll thank me later, Dad, she whispered. In the dark glass of the window behind her, I saw Trevor smiling. After they left, I sat alone at the dining table until past midnight, and then I cried, quietly, onto the wood. Eileen had polished every Saturday morning for 31 years. I had prepared myself for my daughter's greed. I had not prepared myself for how much I still loved her while defending myself from her. The next morning they came back. I had thought they would file everything quietly. Instead, Caitlin wanted the moment. Trevor wanted to watch me hear it. So there we were. My daughter holding the folder. Her husband smiling beside her. It's done, Dad. You signed everything, Trevor added. I took the folder from her hand. I turned to the last page. I looked up at my daughter. For the first time, uncertainty moved across her face. What? She asked. I read aloud. Revocation of all prior financial authorizations. Confirmation of sole ownership and operational authority. Audit trigger upon any attempted third-party transfer. Trevor's smile fell off his face like something unscrewed. That isn't the page, Caitlin said, her voice cutting clean through the room. The careful daughter act was gone. Her eyes were sharp and unfamiliar. That isn't the page. I held it up. This is the page I signed. She reached for it. I pulled it back. No, I said. You've touched enough. Dean Weberly arrived a few minutes later, summoned by a panicked text. He went pale in the doorway when he saw the page in my hand. Mr. Hartley, he started. There appears to be a discrepancy. There certainly is, Dad. Trevor said tightly. What have you done? What had I done? I had protected my late wife's home. I had protected the workshop. I had protected the 9 men and women who clocked in there every morning and went home to their own families on the wages I paid them. But I didn't say any of that yet. Instead, I opened the dark green folder on the sideboard. The one Marguerite had given me. Caitlin's eyes narrowed. What's that? Copies, I said. Notes. Recordings. Emails. A few interesting transfer requests on my business account. Trevor looked at Dean. Dean looked at the floor. That told me something. Dean had suspected more than he wanted to admit. Silence becomes participation when the money is good enough. I held up a page. 3 weeks ago, you forwarded me an email by mistake, Caitlin, from your husband's accountant, about something you both call accelerated control upon signature. Her mouth went very tight. That was privileged. It was sent to me, love. At 11:43 on a Tuesday night. You recalled it, but not before I read enough. She looked at Trevor. Trevor looked at his shoes. You were going to sell the workshop, I said quietly. Trevor cleared his throat. We were going to bring in better management. You were going to sell it to Coastline Industrial. His face went the color of porridge. Coastline had tried to buy Hartley Joinery twice. I'd refused both times. The money wasn't bad. The trouble was, Coastline bought small Kiwi family workshops, made warm speeches about preserving the legacy, then quietly let the long-serving staff go and folded the brand into a warehouse outside Auckland where nobody knew anyone's name. Trevor knew that. So did Caitlin. She lifted her chin. The workshop is past its time, Dad. Trevor deserves more than waiting around for you to retire from your sentimental little operation. 9 people work there, Caitlin. And how many of them are family? She snapped. There it was. Not concern. Not protection. Entitlement. With a smile bolted on top. You had your turn, Dad, she said. Trevor's been waiting years while you act like letting him sit in on a meeting once a quarter is some kind of grand inheritance. I looked at her. Is that what you think this is? She didn't answer. That silence hurt more than anything she had said all morning. We've got debts, she said eventually. Real ones. You think appearances run themselves? We needed liquidity. Liquidity. That was what my wife's house had become to my daughter. That was what my staff's livelihoods had become. How much? I asked. She pressed her lips together. Caitlin. How much? Trevor said it. 360,000. The room went still. For a moment, something close to compassion rose in me. Not forgiveness. Not surrender. Just a quiet, painful recognition. I saw my daughter not as a villain but as a frightened woman whose performed life had begun to consume her. Trevor was scared of being ordinary in front of his Auckland cousins. Caitlin had spent her whole adult life chasing a version of herself she had invented at 23. Together they had mistaken my love for a credit line, and when the line ran out, they had tried to convert what was left of me into property. Then Marguerite walked in. She had been waiting in her car at the end of the street, exactly as we had arranged. Behind her came Hamish Pritchard with a sealed envelope, and Robin Aitken from the workshop's small advisory board. Trevor's voice cracked. Who are these people? Marguerite set her briefcase on my dining table. This is the part of the morning, Mr. Hartley's son-in-law, where everyone stops pretending Mr. Hartley is confused. Dean Weberly's face went gray. Marguerite turned to him first. Mr. Weberly, choose your next words very carefully. The page Mr. Hartley signed last night does not authorize transfer. It revokes it. Any attempt to lodge a conflicting packet after this conversation will be documented as knowingly fraudulent. The Law Society will be notified within the hour. Dean opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Hamish, in his flat accountant's voice, added, "We've also identified attempted access requests on Mr. Hartley's business account from your home address, Trevor. Last Thursday, and again on Saturday." Trevor whispered. Hamish. Hamish shook his head. "Don't." Robin looked at me. "Desmond. The board received notice yesterday afternoon from Coastline. Trevor presented himself to them as your incoming controlling authority 3 days ago. That landed in the room like a hammer striking timber. I looked at my daughter." He told them. Before I had even signed, Caitlin's eyes filled. Trevor said quickly, "It was preliminary." Marguerite turned. It was a signed letter of intent. Caitlin sat down on the edge of Eileen's chair. She hadn't asked permission. I noticed. "You were cashing me out," I said quietly, while I was still alive. Marguerite placed 3 documents in front of my daughter. "Mr. Hartley has options," she said. "Civil action, criminal referral for elder financial abuse, removal of any partnership interest, a protection order regarding interference with his finances." Caitlin looked at me. Not arrogant now. Frightened, Trevor, hardening, said, "You wouldn't do that to your own daughter." "You were counting on that," I said. For the first time since I had known him, my son-in-law had no reply. However, Marguerite continued, "Mr. Hartley has asked me to prepare an alternative." I pulled out one final paper, the one I had spent the longest deciding about. "This is what I'm offering," I said. "You will resign any claim to involvement in Hartley Joinery. You will acknowledge in writing that I retain full authority over my home, my business, and my accounts. You will hand Hamish every communication you have ever had with Coastline, with Dean Weberly, and with any institution you contacted in my name. And then you and Trevor will deal with your debts without my house, without my workshop, and without one more lie at this table." Caitlin pressed her hands flat against the wood. "That's humiliation, Dad." "No, love. Humiliation is trying to take your father's house and failing because you couldn't be bothered reading the last page." Her face went red, then white. Trevor sank into the other chair like a man whose legs had finally given out. He looked at her, and for the first time that morning, I saw something honest move across his face. "You pushed all of this," he said quietly. Caitlin's eyes widened. "Excuse me? You pushed it. From the start, and you agreed." She snapped. "Don't make me the villain because you were too soft to tell my father you wanted what should have been yours." That sentence changed the shape of the room. I stood up. "It was never yours." She glared at me, but I was past being frightened of her now. Not the workshop, not the house, not your mother's savings, not the bench where Mick has been making cabinets for me since 1996, not the cowhide tree out front. None of it was yours. You wanted inheritance without grief, authority without sacrifice, a life without the decades of ordinary mornings that build one, and you almost convinced your husband that stealing from your father was the same thing as becoming an adult. Caitlin grabbed her bag. "This family is mad." "No," I said. "This family was wounded, and you found the wound, and you pressed on it until it bled." She walked towards the door. Marguerite stopped her with a single sentence. "Mrs. Hartley Pierce, I would advise you not to delete or destroy anything. Preservation notices are being sent today." Caitlin froze. Then she walked out of my house without looking back. Dean Weberly left next, mumbling about professional obligations. I never saw him again, except in formal letters from the Law Society months later. He kept his practicing certificate, but only just. Trevor stayed. That surprised me. He sat at my dining table with his hands flat on the wood, the way I had taught Caitlin to sit when she was small and had to apologize for something. Eventually, he said, "I don't know how I let it go this far." "You let it go this far, one excuse at a time," I said. He nodded slowly. He told me then about the debts. the leased Range Rover, the investment property in Taronga that had eaten money for 2 straight years, the credit lines Caitlin had opened in his name, then in her own. He said asking me for help made him feel 14 years old again, standing in his own father's shadow, and he couldn't stand the thought. I listened. Listening was not forgiveness, but it was more than he had earned that morning. When he finished, I said, "I would have helped you." He nodded. Broken. "I know." "No," I said. "You don't. If you knew, you would have come to me as my son-in-law instead of coming for me as a thief." He flinched. Good. Some kinds of truth ought to hurt. By the end of that week, Caitlin signed everything Marguerite required. She withdrew from any claim on the workshop. She handed over the communications. Coastline pulled out the moment they understood Trevor's authority claim had been false. The whole arrangement died the way lies die when the air goes out of them, quietly, with no ceremony. Trevor and Caitlin separated 3 months later. I was not surprised. Their marriage had been built like a show home, beautifully lit and hollow inside. It was never built for storms. Trevor moved into a unit in Nainai. He took a job in sales at a building supply company in Petone, where nobody cared about his last name. He pays his own way now. Caitlin moved to Auckland and went quiet. She rings on my birthday. She rang when our old dog died last spring. We have not spoken about that Tuesday morning. I am not sure we ever will. 6 months after everything, on a Saturday in the middle of an unusually warm August, I found my daughter standing at my front gate. She had a pair of secateurs in her hand and a face I hadn't seen on her since she was 12. "I remember Mum used to cut these back this time of year," she said, looking at the cowhide. "She did. I don't know if I'm doing it right." "You're not," I said. She gave a small, sad laugh. For reasons I am still not entirely certain of, I walked down the steps and showed her where to make the cuts. We worked in silence for nearly an hour. Eventually, she said, "I don't expect you to trust me, Dad." "Good," I said. "Because I don't." She nodded. Then I added, more gently than I had planned, "But trust gets rebuilt the same way it gets broken. One choice at a time." Her eyes filled. She didn't ask for a hug. She didn't ask to come back to the workshop. She didn't ask for money. She just nodded and kept clipping. That was the start of it. Not of everything being repaired. Some things never come back to what they were. What grows after a betrayal like that one is smaller and slower and more honest, if you let it. A year on, my daughter and I have a coffee in Wellington every second Sunday. She buys her own. She asks how the workshop is going, but never as if it is hers. She is paying down the debts. She is in counseling. She has apologized more than once, and each time she understands that an apology is not a key that opens a door whenever she likes. It is only a knock, and I am the one who decides whether to answer. Hartley Joinery is still mine. The house in Lower Hutt is still mine. Eileen's mantel clock still ticks above the sideboard. And the real final page, the one my daughter never bothered to read, is in a frame on the wall of my office at the workshop. Not because I am proud of outsmarting my own child. I am not. I keep it there as a reminder. So I'll leave you with this, because I think it matters. Love your children. Help them when you can. Listen to them when they're frightened, but never confuse love with surrender. And never confuse a familiar voice with a safe one. If a member of your family ever asks you to sign something quickly, in your own kitchen, on a Sunday afternoon, with a glass of red wine in your hand, and a solicitor you have never met before, sitting on the other side of the table, put the pen down. Read every page. Take the papers home. Ring your own accountant on Monday. Ring a solicitor who has never met your children. Keep your enduring power of attorney separate from your business affairs. Write down every conversation. with the date, in something you can lock away. The people who truly love you will still be there on Tuesday. The people who are using you usually won't be. If this story reached you somewhere tender, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever been the one at that dining table, just write, "I see you" down below and I'll see it. And if you know somebody over 60 who needs to hear this before the next quiet Sunday afternoon, please send it to them tonight. Subscribe to Hollow Tales for more stories like this one. There are more of us at that table than anyone wants to admit. And the lesson, in the end, is the simplest one I know. Love is not the same thing as agreement. Kindness is not the same thing as silence. And a father's signature, even at 63, even with grief sitting in the next chair, is still his own to give.